having seen some of his work and heard the accolades of his colleagues and clients, I have to say it would be wonderful to have dinner with Peter along with a few friends to talk about all of those things that interest us as architects. Well, since it's not possible for all of us in this room to sit down together, I've invited a very special host, a man who combines the knowledge of an architect with the investigative skills of a first-rate journalist to engage in this conversation. Inducted this year as a Master Architect into Alpha Rho Chi, a national architectural fraternity, Robert Ivy, FAIA, became only the 7th person in the century-old fraternity to be so honored. Who belongs to this elite group? Among others, Cass Gilbert, Elil Saarinen, Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, Buckminster Fuller, and my partner, I.M. Pei. Well, not bad for a country boy from Mississippi. And as I mentioned earlier, Bob and Peter will have a conversation that will be open to our participation via Twitter and live video streaming. To participate in this conversation, submit questions by sending a tweet using Design10 as the hashtag or via your chat box. Now it's my pleasure to call back to our stage Peter Bohlin and a fellow New Yorker, the editor-in-chief of Architectural Record and vice president of McGraw-Hill Construction Media, my good friend and colleague, Robert Ivy, FAIA.
Congratulations. And I have the distinct pleasure of being a surrogate for a few people in this room and holding a conversation with you. I first met Peter as Paul Goldberg. Actually, I think that house was a seminal project. And I didn't meet you in person, but I met you through the pages of Architectural Record, where you had just designed a house and it had just been recognized as a record house. And it was, for a young architect like myself, looking at this place, it seemed as if this new building, which was unabashedly modernist, it sort of enhanced that place. It was an act, a human act that enhanced that woodland setting. And I hadn't seen you yet, but I knew something about you, I thought. I saw a fresh new approach and a willingness to also be bold in a small building, not for its own sake, not for showing off, but for the sake of the people who were going to be in it and for the site. And that attracted my attention as a young architect. It was a non-doctrinaire modernism, something that we'll talk a little bit about. And it was suited to the place, and as you've just said, very much to the people. Here we are, some 34 years later, sitting on a stage, and you have a whole body of work that you've been involved with and produced so beautifully. So let's talk about that. One of the words I know you've described yourself to a friend of mine, you said you were a soft modernist, a soft modernist. Can you tell me what you meant by that? How does that relate to yourself as you understand your own work?
Well, I'm speaking for myself, but also our practice.
Certainly.
So I think we all share these beliefs, each in our way. Modernism was a great thing, and is. And it's inevitable, except we all value those particular things that were been done extraordinarily well. But also, one, I think, should see modernism as a kind of, also see the ability to react to each circumstance, to think about people and how they are, whether individuals or groups, and how we can enable them. And by the time you're done with all of that, I believe you're not doing a doctrinaire architecture, but a kind of humane, thoughtful, enabling architecture. Now, then that is a search that is both somewhat intellectual but also highly intuitive. And but I think we should each go through that. And you know, it is this brain business, this sides of the brain. And if we don't do that, we are not living up to the great promise of modernism. And in a time when our society really requires this, beyond we personally requiring it ourselves, we're foolish if we don't.
Peter, how did this come about, though? I mean, the modernism that I cut my teeth on required us to draw at right angles and use certain sorts of sheets of paper, and everything had to be black on white. And I mean, how did you evolve this perspective about modernism that allowed you to think outside the borders?
Well, if you search, you're going to find yourselves somehow. And remember, I went to Rensselaer, and then I went to Cranbrook, and that was a really, and I was well grounded at RPI, and that I worked in offices such as Les Gaz's office. But I really was searching. And I remember one of my best teachers was really an architect, Gerhard Kalman, in one of the offices. And he didn't teach by telling me, but he was asking great questions. And if you're searching and then you're pushed in that way, you should find out something about what you believe. And if you look at the past, far in the past as well as more recent past, you will find hints of all of this. And so at the time, I believed, whether right or wrong, that much of modernism was rather deadly and dead. It was good, but it was not human related to any great extent. I don't mean that in any, it just was not as good as it should have been and as touching as it should have been. And if you look at some older buildings, you begin to figure out some of them related better to people than much of modernism. And so it's been a search. You get to Cranbrook, and I was there at a perfect time. Arrow was still alive down the road. Our great hero was Eames, who would come back a few times because he was, a friend of Arrow's, been at Cranbrook. And our studios were particularly open, and by then you'd better search for what you really believed. I don't mean, just what do you think about what we're doing here? And you'd have great examples in the past, sometimes in the present. And so Cranbrook was great. And then, of course, I went to the Boondocks, to Wilkes-Barre, to do a house for my mom and dad. I thought within a year or two, I would have to probably go to Philadelphia or New York. And a lot of my classmates, of course, at Cranbrook went to Arrow's office. That was just before he died. Or to Burkett's, who offered me much more money than I was worth at the time. But I went to the Boonies, which were, tough, but I did a house for my mom and dad. And as some of you may know, it was in the New York Times, not the green one in the forest, the first one. So in those early years, we were figuring out, with Dick Powell and I, partners, we're figuring out how to do a kind of modernism in a place that wasn't used to thinking about that. That really related to each sort of web of circumstance. And so we do Girl Scout buildings, one a year with cookie money, that were published in the Architectural Record, by the way. Or a little factory for the Swedish steel drilling bit company. Or a tiny bank that actually Max Goggins said, I think, Max here, I think it was one of his favorite buildings at the time. It's this funny little bank. But it was really, we broke the mold. And again, we were lucky. And also...
well, here's a
and
term
that's how that started.
Okay. So let's pursue a part of that train of thought. And you've mentioned this word several times, and I'm sure some people in the audience are interested in this as well. And that's this notion of, number one, intellectual pursuit, but also, and that's analytical and pragmatic, but you keep coming back to this term intuitive. And that seems to be sort of in a balance in your work, but something that you constantly return to. And I'm sure there are architects here and others who are interested in design who wonder, is intuition something that can be learned? Is it something that is inherent, or does it derive from continued experience? Is it something in your own work, think about yourself, that has increased as time has passed and you've done more jobs, or your experiences have broadened your perspective? What do you think about intuition?
I don't know. What I do know is that each of us are different, that I probably from those early, there's a better photo of me as childhood than the ones up that I love, by the way. But, you know, even then I was escaping a bit. That'll do it to you. Because, you know, I was raised in a very strict family, actually. And all three of us sort of escaped from those shackles. But beyond that, I don't mean in a bad way. Actually, it's probably very good for us. But it did cause us to escape. That makes you feel a bit. But beyond that, I remember when I was at RPI thinking about, well, my childhood. And, you know, we lived along a stream in Connecticut at that point. Born in the Bronx, with an accent probably like Ed Feiner. I don't know if Ed's here. But I think when I hear Ed, I think, yeah, man, I think I sounded like that. And, but you get shamed out of it sometimes when you're put in another circumstance and you're young enough, which I was, you know. Shame is the wrong word. It's just, man, you better do something about this. But obviously Ed hasn't had to, and man, he's been great. So I think, I don't know, but I do know that, man, I had a good deal of this in the beginning. I would look at under rocks and imagine living there. I'd look down in a little stream behind our house, tiny stream, smaller than these chairs, you know, tiny. I'd imagine those little newts, minnows were salmon. But, and also I fished along the stream. My dad took me fly fishing, and and the way the light would be along that larger stream falling down the mountainside in Connecticut, and the birds and the smell and the air, and feeling, getting a sense of the trout and what they are, where they are, and what they're doing, and how they are, and touching them. Because, you know, you can tickle them. And imagine going through life that way, if you learn to do that. When I was at Salisbury, we would be thrown out of school if they knew this. We spelunked. And so again, you learn about a kind of somewhat random environment, how you titillate, how you reveal and don't reveal. And it goes on and on and on. And so you read and you look, and I think architects do not do that enough. Do not think we do that in school to the extent we should. And yet here, half of us is rooted in this. And to not do that is like giving away half your game and half your life. And so, but I can't explain it.
But it's a kind of an
Each of us
exploration.
is different, I know that.
Yeah. It's a kind of an exploration that you're describing. You use the word search, and you also are talking about nature, which is very interesting. And
but in the city, you can also, you know, I remember parts of the Bronx that are different now. I remember them so clearly, and I remember the sounds. And, you know, I think these are probably clearer than when you get older, but they are so clear, and they still drive you. The sound of children playing maybe 500 feet away, wishing you were there, right?
That's very poignant.
And so if you can deal with that as an architect and put that to use, you can do really very touching buildings. And yet, ones that are rational, that work, that are not foolish, that are not puffed up in ways that are probably not appropriate much of the time, and that truly deal with the full range of all those people around us. If you do that, you have extraordinary effect. You enable people.
So the way I hear that, that's one way of rephrasing that, perhaps also in this idea of a search, is part of this has to do with memory. And it's memory of things that you sensed as a young person, things that you heard, things that you smelled, things that you moved through, places you saw, light. I'm extrapolating here from your conversation. Part of this is played out in your own work, and I'm thinking about here your interest in sustainability. Certainly, you've just been talking very eloquently about nature. And you were early on interested in what we'd now call eco-friendly, sustainable, green architecture, but you were doing it at an early time. I think it was evident in your first completed building. Tell us about that. Tell us about this concern for buildings that are related to some sort of relationship with the earth.
Well, if you go back through history, you find that again and again.
Yeah.
When I was at RPI and then Cranbrook, I was very interested in primitive buildings because modernism is somewhat disconnected from the culture of modern architecture. Buildings we do now because we can cheat so much and things change so fast. But if you look at primitive societies, they had no choice. They really had to, and there was a connection between the way those cultures developed and their circumstance, such as, and it was interesting. You'd look at the world and you'd see that there are buildings in North Africa, buildings in our Southwest, and buildings in China that are quite similar. Well, they would often have issues of climate, material, that were very similar. And then you'd see differences that were somewhat by choice, such as buildings in North Africa that would have strange bumps. And they, of course, were bumps that wouldn't wear away easily, right? But they also marked, it was a marker of importance. And you'd see that Seminole dwellings and buildings in New Guinea were quite similar in a lot of ways, but then they were not, because there were choices being made within those almost inevitable solutions. So, if you begin, we have lost that, although we've talked about it in these meetings, we've lost much of the sort of inevitability of those kinds of solutions. But there are great lessons there. It's just more complicated now to think about them all because they're so entwined with technology as well. And so I think we have to reason our way through this constantly, and you're looking for the connections between people, the society, how we are. We are not changing half as quickly as our world around us is in our environment, and what we do is changing. And so there's a question of can we adapt? And so I think, and it's certainly true of our practice, all of us, we're really interested in these issues and what do they mean about making buildings? And the circumstance keeps changing. We've just done a project in Shanghai for Uniqlo, and it had to get built. It was an existing building, a modern building that wasn't so good. And so but beyond everything else, had to get done in 3 months. And opening day had 75,000 people, which is staggering. And I was listening to the keynote and the fact that the world is changing. And a week later, Nick LaHoo, our photographer, went back hoping to get better photos because there were so many people, though. I love the photos with people in them. And there was a line around 2 blocks still. And we worked hard there to get people to recognize that there was an upstairs, because it was an office building before. And so we cut shards of space. You saw an image or two, I think, before of that. And we had mannequins going up and down through the space, drawing people upwards, sort of like and so on, and downwards. Now, we've done the same at Apple, right? There's a similar challenge in a way. The first ones, like, as Carl would know, was here, my partner Carl Backus, the first 2-story stores were one at the Grove in LA, was in a shopping center, and 2 was Soho in New York. The challenge is, in retail, how do you get people to go up gracefully? I mean, you can force them up, but that's not the thing to do. And so we made places, stairs and so on, where they might levitate, have a sense of levitation. That got us started on looking at glass a lot harder. And quite different technical solutions, because in LA we hung that stair in that little store, which most people probably haven't even noticed, and because it's earthquake. And so the glass has to sway a bit. If you make it rigid, it's liable to crack. So, and to Fifth Avenue, the challenge is in reverse. How do you get people to want to go down? That had always been a failure. How do you do this for Apple? You know, in the nature of Apple, nature of Steve, nature of their products, and nature of that place in New York. And so the challenge is, how do you titillate? How do you draw people? How do you hint at what's there? And in Boston, I think we've done now quite a few 3-story stores. How do you get people to go 2 stories? Very interesting.
Well, speaking of challenges and changes, we're in a new era, and you're obviously working with Apple. You've worked with Uniglow, new companies. One of the components of this afternoon is taking questions from other people than myself. And YouTube, a number of questions have been posted by YouTube. So in the course of this afternoon, we're going to take one or two, and I think it's time to take one. It's a natural moment for such a thing. Let's look at YouTube and see see if there is a question for us. Can we cue the YouTube tape?
Congratulations on being the 2010 AIA Gold Medal recipient. My name is Cassandra Howard from Tulane University in New Orleans, home of our 2010 Super Bowl champions. My question for you today is, if you were to wake up tomorrow and look out your window and could only see one building for the rest of your life, what building would it be and why?
Stump the speaker.
You said do only one building?
See only one building.
See.
If you could wake up...
If it was do,
no,
I would say
yes.
a building that, like one of the great Gothic cathedrals that took forever.
Okay.
That would really work.
Very good. Very good.
I don't know if I could see only one building. I'd have a list of about 3 dozen, and there are a lot I don't know about. I mean, there are modern things that I haven't been to, like La Tourette.
Sure.
I really want to go there. I want to see its mold.
Have you been an architectural tourist, though? Have you?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
No, see a lot.
Yeah.
And we teach quite a bit here and there. Like Sally and I go to Portugal in December and spend, I'm going to see quite a bit there. But we are going to see quite a bit. And Bernie's been teaching in Spain. From that, we've gotten this, lecturing. Extraordinary job for the church there. I won't talk about it. It's an amazing job. And so, I don't know. I mean, I guess you just keep finding out. I have seen some buildings that touched me greatly, like the Villa Maria, Altos, and which is really international style overlaid with rusticity. I don't know. I have a feeling maybe I think there would be at least 2 or 3 dozen, and if I'm not immortal, I think I won't get to see them all.
Well, you'll have an opportunity to think about a few others as the afternoon goes on, and just pop in and drop them into the conversation. You have had an interest all the way through of melding, though, back to our conversation about rational, intuitive, ecological nature and the relationship of buildings to the earth. Somehow you've managed to pull it off in a way that other people would like, and that is that these things don't look like they're added to the projects that you work on, to the structures and the buildings that you do. Too often they seem to be technological or utilitarian, and you've managed to work them into the fabric of the buildings themselves, even to bring a sort of aesthetic sense to it. And I'm thinking here of that Shelley Ridge Girl Scout Center. I mean,
Which is very early.
That. Yeah, very as early
and
as
a lot
that.
of that had to do with Frank Grauman, another partner I believe is here right now. Frank and I did that together, and it was many of Frank's insights. We found that, for instance, on that, I mean, the idea of invention, we may think architects invent. I think architects rarely invent because it's more an aesthetic than a true invention. But I think Frank came very close to making a true invention there. Trom walls had been, what, 12 or 13 inches thick. And that was one of the last round of passive solar demonstration buildings, a non-residential. And it was the time of Jimmy Carter. And so the Girl Scouts hired us. Actually, our slide machine broke down. They said one reason they hired us, I believe, I remember this right, Frank, because we kept our cool. It's another thing, keep your cool.
Pay attention to the gold medalist.
Yeah, keep your cool. And see the humor of it all, including of yourself. But we and Bert Hill, who did this study together, discovered that if it's a daytime building and it's a trom wall, it should only be about 4 inches thick. And how do you do a 4-inch thick trom wall? And so we made a heavy timber frame and put a brick infill in. Then we put cowl wall on the outside. We did all those things. But we did a building that the girls could operate. And we saw also that daylighting was a critical other issue in doing many of these buildings. And so the children operated. Therefore, they would understand, because they would operate it. It wouldn't be done at them. It's a big thing you've just pointed to about much of sustainability, which I'm not disagreeing about, is not clear to people. They would take it for granted. That's okay. But when you make it clear, particularly to children, it's liable to really stick. And so invention, curiosity. Someone in Texas, a very good architect, introduced me and said he thought one reason is that we had the staying, that we've kept doing good things so long. And we will continue to as far as we can all see into the future. We, not me. Is curiosity. That may be a little true. Robert Miller, another partner, is probably here. He is unbelievably inventive in the true sense of it. Like he did the periscope at Ballard, among many other things there. He took the lead on Ballard. I was heavily involved. It was a great pleasure for both of us. But he did the periscope. Who does periscopes? Well, Jimmy Cutler had done a periscope over urinal on Bainbridge. It was really nice. You could look out to the sailboats while you're standing there. However, so Robert laid this out on the floor of our office. It's about very long thing. And we could lie down on the floor and tune it till we got it right. Now, he kind of almost invented there. I think it's extremely rare. I think we all should be inventing more. This isn't a matter just says, tell us what to do, and we'll do it. That's fine. At least you can meet many of your ethical imperatives, let's say. But if you wish to make a rich world, you're going to get into the middle of it. And that means that many of us were technically trained as well as went to places like Cranbrook. I mean, RPI was a great grounding. You really want to get in the middle of that and invent. Truly try to get at the nature of materials and things. If you do that, it's one of the great pleasures, because you're going to make by far more powerful architecture and places. And if you can involve people in the process, then you've done a hell of a thing.
So involving people, let's follow that up too, because this is a great segue to how you work. And unlike some of the other gold medalists who I think would stand in center stage and have taken full responsibility for every act or every line drawn, you in fact, in just the course of that conversation, have named 2 or 3 people who have been critical to various aspects of your own work in your office. And you're very open about the fact that you work in this very collaborative way among these various offices. Can you describe how you and your partners work together? Say just around the act of design. What is your design modus operandi? How do you get it done?
Let me first say this.
Yeah.
That recently, and it's some of the very best journalists, once said that we were headquartered in Wilkes-Barre. We're not.
Yeah.
I don't think we're headquartered. And you don't have to be these days. We have 5 offices. If you think about the way our world is now, we don't, what do you mean headquartered? I mean, you need some people somewhere, which we have in Wilkes-Barre, that are very good at running the numbers. But you don't even have to. But our, let's call it business partner, Dan Haydenwood, may be gone by now. He was here earlier. He's in Philly. I think between our 5 offices, we can do it any which way. And we will, and we are. I don't think we have to be headquartered anyway. I think that's somewhat of a roadkill thought. I think you do not enable the other people in the firm by thinking that and acting on it that way. And you don't have to. We are rather collegial. Now, we still are going to take some serious responsibilities, but I would prefer we all do it, and I do it by persuasion rather than forcing. On occasion, that's frustrating. And on occasion, you think, oh man, do that another way. But so be it. I think we should do it by persuasion, whatever that is, and insight, and keep forcing ourselves. And we should look at everyone within the practice that way, not just some older people, although our youngest partner, who's Ray Calabro, points out to me, I am his oldest partner. No, one day I went to Pixar, and I remember, I think Carl probably knows this, and I said to Steve Jobs, I said, you know, Steve, I'm the oldest building, I think I'm the oldest person in this building. Because, you know, the animators, they're all youngsters.
Yes.
And so Steve said, well, I'm beginning to feel that way. So we really have to see without being fools. You know, we still are architects. We are responsible how to get the most out of all of us. And that's the way we are the very best people in our practices. That's the very best way to see our future. That is the greatest pleasure for me, to act in to operate and to play, really. Because we're children. I mean, I don't know, any of you admit to being children? Okay. Others are and probably don't want to admit it, I bet you. And probably we almost all are. Now, it depends how you look at childhood. But I think we are playing. My original partner, who was a great partner, Dick Powell, said to me before he retired, he said, Peter, you treat this corporation, you've heard this, Bob, like a hobby. Well, we're still here.
Pretty good.
So, and it's not pejorative about Dick, but it's a point about, because he was a great partner, I was very lucky. Because you needed that. I mean, when I was right out of school almost. And we started a week before I got my license, actually. That's the truth. But Dick was 9 years older. He was a great athlete, was in the Olympics. He got 2 gold. He was an All-American twice. I asked him, what did he learn from that? He was a lacrosse player. He said, getting rid of the ball. So, but the point is though, that in the end, if you don't love it like a kind of great hobby, I'm not sure, as my daughter pointed out to me when she decided she'd be a great architect, said, well, I'm going to do something else. You better want to do it badly, because there are easier things to do, and you might make more money.
This is fascinating, and I mean, it follows on. We write and talk and go to seminars, and all these people have been collecting CEUs, me included, about how to run a practice. And what you've described, though, really is a networked, collegial, non-hierarchical group that's connected by something that they really love. And
Yeah.
I mean, that's a great definition of art.
And we all have
what an
slightly different
architect's
views
all
of
about.
this.
Yeah.
You know, we're not the same. None
Yeah.
of us are. No
Sure.
two people in this room are the same.
Yeah.
If they think they are, they're wrong.
Right.
We have common traits. But I bet you, Al, wherever my brother-in-law Al is, I know he's here somewhere, I bet even people's organs are not all the same. I bet there's some weird things here.
Peter, one of the aspects of the afternoon is not just YouTube, but people in this audience right here are sending in questions from their cell phones, from their Blackberries, and we've just gotten a question from Twitter. This is from someone named R. Murphy19, and he or she says, if you've been doing eco projects for 30 plus years,
Sort of.
and it's just now becoming really commonplace, what should we be focused on doing now?
Well, for one, I think echo these issues of the nature of the world and what we should do about it are so complex in many cases that no one's nailed that one.
Yeah.
No one is nailing it. It is societal. Probably we're all doing so many things that are highly questionable if you look at where the world is going. And I include myself in that. And we at least should see the humor of it. I don't think we should all kill ourselves over it.
Right.
But I don't think echo is a simple issue at all. None of us do. And it's a rich issue, and it's a wonderful issue, and we better worry a lot about it. And we owe it to everybody to do that. But beyond that, we should think about the whole thing. I mean, we are in a democracy, right? Sort of. And, you know, we're doing a border crossing, and that's really interesting these days because on one hand you have all the security that we must do. We have no choice, I think. And on the other, it should be humane. It should be a soft modernism. How do you do this? And so I think the same is true of whether we think of resources, we think of societies, all of this. And so we should welcome such a range of work. We have never specialized. I mean, if people ask me that, I say, well, we want to do good buildings. You know, we don't anything. Now and then we get something because we do a great dental school like Bernie has done. All of a sudden we're an expert. But the truth is that it's good to never give up doing little things or big things, and they're all sort of the same in that there are people involved, almost always, unless you're doing something for your dog. And I once did I thought it was a very nice, very early in our career, a very good doghouse. And then a vet told me, no, the best doghouse is a barrel, and you put a canvas flap on it, you drill a hole in the bottom so the pee runs out.
Barrels are made of wood.
It would have been cheaper.
Yeah.
It would have recycled a barrel.
Well, barrels are made of wood, and canvas is at the flap. So let's talk about materials for a second. How about that? I mean, part of what we admire in your work is this absolutely beautiful way that small things relate to the whole, that the thought that goes into the project carries through from the idea, and we've been talking about a lot of general ideas, but it carries through the tectonics of the building. How is it put together? What is this detail, and how does it relate to the rest of the building? How does this glass wall abut this wooden wall? Could you talk a little bit about materials and the idea of putting them together and what that means to you and your office?
Well, one, someone might say, I'm not quite saying it this way because I don't know that I agree with the word, one should not denigrate the nature of things like wood or glass or stone or the land or the smell of a place, for instance, might be great. I don't mean a sweet smell, it might be a strange one. Those are all things that we're wrestling with. How you relate or don't, how you mask or don't. If you're doing underground things, which I love, how you reveal and don't reveal, how you choose to do that, how you bring light in, how you make a joint. Those are all how we make things. You know, sometimes the the humor of it, of course, is that sometimes revealing costs more. And so, we're always torn by this about what to reveal and what not to. But those kind of challenges are really a rich treasure trove for modernists, certainly, for all of us. And wondering about them is really quite important. And I would say that, and you can deal with those on a visceral level. How you touch things, like Dennis, are you here somewhere? Dennis is somewhere, Dennis Schofield. He and I have done a house recently, and a few others in our San Francisco office, that we're really quite pleased about. And we did the hardware, and we designed it to touch and to grasp. How you think of all things that way, within reason, whatever that is. And how you, to the extent of each circumstance, because some you can manage to do it from an economic point of view, some you can't. How you choose to make places where, for instance, you think about how people touch things. I mean, Asplund was very good at that. If you go to the little film, the theater, and they did the little film theater in Stockholm. Some of you have been there, right? That he did early in his career, early middle. That rail was amazing that he did. And also, I think the one at the library, as I recall, in Stockholm, because it's how you touch it and how you see its nature and how it reminds you of other things. For instance, I was intrigued, and we were, when we did our first non-modern, rustic building, which we were asked to do in the Adirondacks. And so it's modernist, but it's also relating to the nature of the great camps. What a wonderful release for an architect. That's not a trap to not be able to do a hard modern building, but to begin to say, wait a minute, I mean, what are we doing here? And so we have flashed areas at the bottom of wood posts that look like socks. I mean, if you just do it technically right, and you make a reglet, you cut it in, it looks like a sock or a foot on that column. And if you do, and that's true of almost all things in architecture, it's reminding us of other things, back to your point about memory. And whether it's back to childhood or wherever, you're going to, and whether you realize it or not, a lot of these things go right by. But they begin to resonate, and they begin to touch people's memory and their nature. If you can do that and get it about right, it's highly intuitive, I think, as well as intellectual. Man, you have so much. Well, one, it's great fun, it's great pleasure, but also you're making a great world for everyone and for yourself and others.
How do you do that?
But it's all this issue of memory, touching, detailing, how you reveal, how you deal with corners.
How do you do the things that you've just described when we're moving into this 21st century new world, and you're working not only with the Adirondacks, but with clients like Apple and places like emerging China, where people are lining up around the block for whole new ideas? How do you do it when you're working with a staircase that's in structural glass? And that question of detailing and memory, how does that come together for you? I mean, how does Apple's work, for instance, fit into your own approach to design?
I think they're all really the same.
All really the same?
In this way.
Okay.
That you're always getting at the nature of people.
Right.
Thinking about places.
Right.
Wherever. And, urban places are extraordinary, for instance. Campus places are extraordinary, can be. You can make extraordinary things that aren't all there, but someday will be if you get it right. And so it requires a kind of open-mindedness and yet a kind of discipline in a way, right? Rigor. I'd say rigor and open-mindedness. Now, that's soft modernism in my view, that touches humans. And if you get that right,
Okay. That's good.
you've nailed the mother.
We've got one more question from Twitter, and this is from U.E. Sider, playing Oprah here. If you have one piece of advice or word of wisdom for an emerging architect today, what would it be?
Well, let me just say this first.
Okay.
Our office has an app, by the way.
Yep. Very appropriate.
It went up during this convention. And we will build on it over the next weeks and months, because you've got to, well, I won't get into the details, but we have an app. We also are Twittered,
Yep.
and we're Facebooked. So now the question, what advice?
One piece of advice for a young architect today, what would it be?
It depends on the person. One great thing about architecture is there's need for many of us, and we're all quite different, with a range of abilities. And so it isn't one thing, it's many things. And it depends a lot on that person and their interests and abilities. And I think we're all very lucky in this regard. It's not like being a great musician, I suspect, or a physicist. We are in a hybrid of a circumstance. We are lucky to be able to dance, in a way, between people and things and technology and places and making sense of it all. And we have a great need. The name of a bookkeeper who's architect at Lescaze's office was Harry Dumper, as I recall. There was a great need for him. So the point is, and I'm not making fun now, and for Dick Powell, who was not a design architect in the normal sense, but is extraordinary. And so that's the first part of that question. Answer. Find out where you fit if you wish to do this. Then I would say start wondering a lot and don't believe everything you're told. But that's true. I mean, I went to parochial school in my earliest years, Lutheran parochial school. I got a D in art. That's because I refused to do what they told me to do, which was stupid on their part.
This definitely says something about you, though. I mean,
No, my parents fortunately saw, even if they were rather strict, they saw that they didn't criticize me for that. Because my dad had taught me how to do perspectives, not set them up, but how to see that way. And so I wasn't going to do what they told me in school to do. So I think you must go at architecture that way. You must think about what you believe and what you see. And think about all of this and read like crazy, and hopefully you'll survive and graduate. Because the programs are not necessarily going to be thrilled about this, and I'm not being critical of schools, but you're liable to put in very long hours and not quite the way the school is predicting you should. But I would say you better get used as an architect to finding your way, somehow dancing through a bit, gracefully, hopefully, and find your way. And if you believe enough, get through. And find your way. I would say beyond that, my own prejudice would be, please don't just be computer-based. And after we did Bill Gates' house with Jimmy. We work for Apple. Greg Mottola, for instance, another partner. We have done work for Adobe. However, please use these as well. So,
that's a great ending. That's a great ending. Peter, I think that really sort of is a logical conclusion to our discussion. But it's fascinating to talk to you like this and to have the chance and sit and just sort of ruminate. It's been like being in a room in front of a fireplace. The fireplace, however, is about 2,000
they're all the
people out
fireplace.
there. They're the fireplace. But what we heard from
and it's
you...
a really nice, there's nice heat on our toes.
Yeah. to hear you talking about memory and childhood and oral memory and oral memory, to talk about dance and to talk about poetry in a way is not something that I necessarily would have thought we would have been chatting about as we sat down. I think a few people have learned some real insights into you, and I want to thank you for it.
Thank you. And all I would say is, on the other side, we must be highly professional, whatever that means.
Yep.
I think what it means to take great responsibility for what you do, and to therefore think real hard about what you're doing. But beyond that, we must be rigorous. I mean, we are split personalities. We must be rigorous. We must be